But first, as Howard Cosell used to say, how about a little controversy? Well, that's me, because here's my question. Should Canadians be thanking President Trump? Oddly enough, there might actually be a silver lining to his tariff threats. I know, on again, off again tariff threats. But they forced the federal government and Canadians to finally confront some long ignored problems, like our border security and the fentanyl crisis, which puts long overdue spotlight on Chinese organized crime operating in Canada. Although I got to say, the federal Liberals are still denying it despite the mounting evidence. They say it's not a big problem. Only 1% of fentanyl going into the States come from Canada. Well, researchers like Sam Cooper have obliterated that comment. But thanks to Trump's tariffs, Canada's also being forced to face its chronic failure to meet our NATO spending commitment. It's supposed to be 2%. We signed on in writing, but we continue to ignore it. And we're currently sitting at just 1.37%. Maybe under this pressure, the government will finally address the neglect of our serving armed forces members, from their families and mental health support to modern equipment and capabilities. And perhaps the most overdue wake-up call is the focus on the economy itself. After nearly a decade where economic growth took a backseat to other priorities like climate change or the expansion of government. Liberal partisans won't like that, but consider what new Liberal leader Mark Carney recently admitted. In quotes, our economy over the last 5 years has been driven by a surge in immigration and government spending that grew 9% year after year, more than double the rate of economic growth. So our economy was weak before Trump's tariffs, end of quote. Well, for years, anyone who dared point that kind of thing out was attacked by the Liberals. But now it's coming from their chosen leaders. So at the very least, I think they're going to have to swallow hard and sit down, although I think that's wishful thinking. Even the Liberal NDP coalition and their climate activist allies are quietly thinking the sacred restrictions on oil and gas development, including their war on pipelines. A recent Angus Reid poll found that 79% of Canadians now support building oil and gas pipelines from coast to coast. And yes, that includes strong majorities in Quebec and Atlantic Canada backing the revival of Energy East. But given Mark Carney's contradictory and vague statements on pipelines, we'll actually see if that manifests into action. I can't help but notice that the same politicians, by the way, and backed by millions of Canadians who spent a decade fighting tooth and nail against fossil fuel development, all now point to oil and gas as Canada's most important asset in the tariff war with the US. This about face is absolutely staggering, though the newly minted Oil and Gas Matters crowd still won't admit the true cost of their opposition. $176 billion in canceled or shelved energy projects, billions more in lost investment after successfully convincing global capital that Canada was no longer a viable destination. And there's one more surprising silver lining to the Trump tariffs. It's this. Finally, serious talk about removing interprovincial trade barriers. At least it's on the table. I mean, we've known for years the cost of those barriers to the Canadian economy was between 130 and 200 billion every year, yet nothing was done. Only now, with the Trump tariff threat, do we even hear about it? I mean, it's noteworthy. In just 2 months, Trump got more movement on the elimination of our interprovincial trade barriers than Canadian politicians have in decades. I'm still shocked, by the way, by how many Canadians had no idea these barriers even existed, let alone the damage they cause. Even supply management's being discussed. President Trump raised the issue in a call with Prime Minister Trudeau on Wednesday. But come on, the feds have made it clear that Canada's tariffs on between, they're 200 to 300% on U.S. dairy and poultry imports are non-negotiable, despite the significant costs to Canadians. But at least it's being talked about. So yes, thanks, President Trump, for forcing these issues on the agenda. We still have to see meaningful action, not just political talking points. And until we do, the so-called Team Canada response is little more than empty rhetoric and virtue signaling. I mean, it comes back to that familiar issue. Who benefits from a weak economy? Well, it never was anybody in Canada, and it certainly won't help us face the very real threats posed by Trump's tariffs.